There is grandeur in this view of life.
Welcome to Evolution Talk with Rick Coast, an introduction to the oldest story ever told.
You have to realize that as far as gross evolutionary pressure is concerned, there is none anymore on the human race. For example, in the old days, when we lived in the forest, there were enormous selection pressures placed on us to develop a large brain, to understand how to use tools, to run, to be able to navigate, to survive in the forest. Enormous pressures on us, because if you were not fit to live in the forest, you died.
That's theoretical physicist Michio Kaku. It's a common claim these days that evolution by natural selection, at least when it applies to you and I, is no longer that big of a deal. The argument is that we've pushed natural selection aside and taken the reign of our own development. Through technology, medical advances, and our culture, the things that used to drive our evolution are gone. Charles Darwin's theory is simple in its elegance. Nature selects for those adaptations that allow an organism to survive long enough to reproduce. Those adaptations are then passed on, and over time, they dominate the population. It can be an isolated population, like the one that lives on an island. Darwin saw this with his finches and the tortoises in the Galapagos. Take a species, separate it by a mountain range, and step away for a few million years. Peek in on them and you may find so many differences between the two that they are no longer able to mate with one another. Give it a few more million years and they may not even look as if they ever shared a common ancestor. The next time you pet a cat, just know that your shared common ancestor with that cat once walked the earth 100 million years ago. That's an estimate, of course. Natural selection is subtle, and it doesn't perform magic tricks. It won't pull a rabbit out of a hat, but it will turn the simple-celled organism living in the hat into something else if you give it enough time. And that's the thing with arguments that natural selection no longer play an important part in our development. Its very premise says that we've somehow stepped out of nature and are now immune to its effects. Nature doesn't mean the jungle or a less industrialized culture. If you hop into a space shuttle, one that can support life for a few million years, you're still being affected by the forces of nature. You will still adapt to your environment. There will always be selective forces at play. You can't get away from it. And there's no set speed. The road of evolution doesn't care about speed or destination. It doesn't care about anything at all. Our job as a species is to stay on the road or die trying.
Ghana appears to be making some gains in its fight against malaria, as the number of cases has been on a steady decline in the last 2 years. Now, 2014, for instance, recorded 8.4 million cases compared to the 10 million recorded in 2013. Officials say the number of deaths due to malaria has also reduced.
You know, scientists may have found a way to stop the spread of malaria. They've created a mosquito that makes it resistant to that disease. They say the bug is infected with a certain bacteria.
Malaria is a nasty disease and one we've been battling for centuries. Now, long story short, you have this little protozoan which loves to hitch a ride on mosquitoes unannounced. Now, if an organism has this protozoan in its blood, along comes a mosquito, it lands, it draws blood, and with that blood is the protozoan. The protozoan then sets up shop in the mosquito's gut where it breeds. The next time the mosquito lands, there's a transfer of blood. If that transfer of blood involves you or I, that protozoan heads to the liver, where it lives, breeds, and eventually bursts into the blood to attack the red blood cells. That's when trouble starts. While we as a species are throwing everything we have at it that we can develop, nature's been doing so as well.
Well, what's the history of this disease? It's been a severe disease for thousands of years. In fact, if we look at the genetic code, it's the only disease we can see that people who lived in Africa actually evolved several things to avoid malarial deaths.
That's Bill Gates during a recent TED Talk. One of those adaptations that we can point to is sickle cell anemia. While it's not something you want to have under normal conditions, when it comes to malaria, it's extremely effective against the malaria parasite. Those red blood cells are no longer disc-shaped, they're sickle-shaped. Think of it as a crescent moon and you'll have the right idea. The parasite, when encountering a sickle-shaped cell, can't do anything with it. The red blood, while handicapped from performing its normal duties, is immune to the parasite's attack. In populations where malaria runs rampant, those individuals with the sickle cell gene have an advantage. Once it happens, if it happens, and it provides an advantage, nature has something to select for. As anthropologist John Hawkes once put it,
it has to happen in a population, the mutation, in order to be selected in the population. Not only that, it has to survive the first few generations when it's initially rare. A mutation that happens that's valuable that doesn't survive those first few generations will never be established in a population. A mutation that doesn't happen will never be established in a population. Different genetic strategies have been lit upon in different human populations because of chance.
Tried Borden's milk and ice cream. Wow, good, says Elsie the Borden cow. By Borden now it's good, cause if it's Borden, it's gotta be good. Hey Mom, be sure to buy Borden. Buy Borden.
Milk it does a body good.
Oh, pass it on.
What'd you say?
Picks you up any time of day.
Gives you fuel so you can play.
Gives you calcium and vitamin C.
as a culture, we love dairy products. Give me some aged cheddar cheese, or better yet, feta cheese, and I'm in heaven. And I used to say if I was on a deserted island and could only have one drink, it would be milk. Actually, I might still say that. I am also a mutant. Now, if you can drink milk without feeling gaseous, or you can eat a bowl of ice cream without experiencing cramps, then you might be a mutant too. We are the exception. 75% of the world's population can't do what we do. And it's all because of 4 little genes, or alleles if you want to be more specific. When we're young, and by we, you can apply this to all mammals, when we're young, we produce an enzyme called lactase. This enzyme enables us to break down lactose in milk. Lactose is a carbohydrate, and without lactase to break it down, we have a very hard time digesting it. And because most mammals are introduced to the world with their mother's milk as a chief form of nutrition, it makes sense. We produce lactase to break down the lactose. As we get older, lactase production is stopped. For some of us, that is. For others, lactase continues to be produced and allows us to enjoy Friday night pizza, milk in our cereal, and big bowls of Ben & Jerry's peanut butter fudge core. I love Ben & Jerry's peanut butter fudge core. This ability to generate lactase well after we have been weaned off of our mother's milk is due to a mutation in our genes that occurred around 7,500 years ago. It started in Europe with cattle herders. Milk remained a staple of their diets, and so they evolved to accommodate it. Thus, the 4 genes I mentioned, which mutated to allow lactase to be produced into adulthood, and to show that nature often solves the same problem the same way. This ability to produce lactase, while the rest of the world's population shuts it off, has been found in other cultures. You can find these mutants in Tanzania, Kenya, and Sudan. And today, if you're in the US, the numbers are flipped. Instead of there being 25% of us who produce lactase as an adult, here in the US it's 75%. Since we're on the subject of digestive enzymes, there's another example of human evolution in action. This involves the breaking down of starches found in carbohydrates. Populations which consume a lot of carbs also produce an enzyme called amylase. And amylase production is tied to a gene called AMY1, that's AMY1. If your culture consumes more protein than carbs, you'll find the AMY1 gene less prevalent. Again, nature selects for what works when presented with the option. And if you're part of the Inuit people of Greenland, you also eat a lot of fatty acids. And the digestion of fatty acids is also linked to mutated alleles present in Inuit ancestry. You know the old saying, you are what you eat? You literally are because of what you eat. I'll give you one more example, an even more recent one. In Tibet, especially the higher elevations, the air is extremely thin. So thin, in fact, that you and I would have a very hard time breathing. If I asked you how you could fix it, given the chance, you might tell me to either give everyone oxygen tanks or to make it so that they have a higher concentration of oxygen in their bloodstream. Therein lies the predictive power of evolution. Researchers have found that the people in Tibet's higher elevations have evolved to allow for a greater concentration of oxygen in their blood, just as you would have predicted. While they are still working to identify the allele responsible, the results are there. It's more evidence of natural selection working on a human population placed in what you or I would call a harsh environment. Now don't forget, natural selection will choose for an adaptation or set of traits that allows for an organism to live long enough to produce copies of itself. In this case, a mutation which allows for oxygen-rich blood for the people of Tibet, at least above normal oxygen-rich blood. This gives a child a better chance of surviving into adulthood. So that allele, the one that accounts for a higher concentration of oxygen, persists and propagates. We as a species have done an amazing job to reduce the stress in our lives and on our bodies. We have our large brain to thank for that, even if they are shrinking a bit. Another sign of evolution in action, even though we're not quite sure why this is at the moment. But our abilities to mitigate stress have done amazing things for us as a culture and as an organism. Whereas certain diseases would have wiped out large groups of the population in the past, we can now eradicate, in some cases, these diseases before they have a chance to do so to us. We develop cures and solutions before natural selection has a chance to do so. And it's safe to say, had we not developed the cures ourselves, natural selection may never have had a chance to save us. We could have gone the way of the dinosaurs a long time ago. We might still if an asteroid barrels into us, but barring an asteroid collision, we've managed to do just fine without having to wait for a random mutation here and there to save us. Now that doesn't mean we are not evolving or that natural selection has nothing to do. Now, the way I look at it, and I would argue the way it should be looked at, is that every advance we make, everything that we do to extend human lives, is natural selection at work. It doesn't have to be tied to a mutation in our genes. It can also be tied to the amazing things we create and accomplish. We are still the products of nature, working in nature and manipulating nature to our advantage. There are still selective forces at work, following the laws of nature and allowing us to survive a little bit longer than our ancestors were able to. From this humble little planet, we may eventually spread out to populate more humble little planets. And on those planets, we'll encounter new challenges and chances to evolve. As Dr. Ian Malcolm, as played by Jeff Goldblum, said in the movie Jurassic Park,
The history of evolution has taught us that life will not be contained. Life breaks free, it expands to new territories, and it crashes through barriers painfully, maybe even dangerously. But I'm simply saying that life finds a way.
Evolution Talk is written and produced by myself, Rick Coast. Now, if you enjoy the show, and I really hope you do, you can help the show by sharing it. And tell your friends about it, and this show will always be free. And if you're a patron of the arts and want to help me produce more episodes, head on over to evolutiontalk.com/support. And if you want to learn more about the music on today's episode, you can find all of this and more at the show's official site, evolutiontalk.com. As always, thank you for listening. And until next time, please take care of yourself.
Now you see what a cow is made of. There's the whole layout.
Yeah, but where do you get the milk from?
Yeah. Well, there's a pipeline that connects the spare ribs and comes down through the chopped liver, connected by a homophagal through the meatloaf. You drop up here to liverwurst and a straight drop down to the auto club where you get your 3 gallons.
Of milk?
No, gas.
Evolution Talk is a Rick Coast production.